Okay, good afternoon and a very warm welcome on behalf of our hosts today, EFPIA and MedTech Europe, to this virtual event on unlocking the power of health data, the promise of the European health data space. My name is Jackie Davis and I'll have the privilege of moderating two short, totally interactive debates this afternoon after a brief presentation to set some context for our discussion as we consider the value that data can deliver for patients and society, and crucially, the key barriers that we need to overcome if we are to realize its full potential to deliver better, more patient-centered healthcare and more resilient, efficient healthcare systems. Bit of housekeeping before we get underway. In the panels, they will start with some questions from me to all our panelists, but I hope also from all of you. You are all muted for now. If you want to ask a question and you want to speak, click on the raised hands button at the bottom of your screen. And when the time comes, I will allow you to talk. No need to activate your camera. You simply activate your mic. If you want to write your question, please use the Q&A button, not the chat button, the Q&A button, and write your question there. And could I ask you, please, in both cases, to be as brief as possible so we can get as many questions in as possible. And in case of the written ones, I can see at a glance what you want to know and who you want to know it from. The Twitter hashtag, should you wish to share with the outside world what you are hearing here today, is the EFPIA hashtag for the webinar series, Questions Inspire Solutions. And I should also tell you the event is being recorded and will be shown on the EFPIA YouTube channel after this event. So let us get underway. And Stella Kyriakides, the European Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, couldn't join us this afternoon, but she did want to speak to you. So let's hear what she has to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, data is knowledge when it is put to good use. Data can help us protect citizens, prevent and treat illness, and to save lives. Data can then also mean better health for our citizens. The question is, how do we unlock that data and maximize its potential? The European health data space is key to achieving that goal, and I want to thank the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations and MedTech Europe for organizing today's event. The new pharmaceutical strategy looks to ensure that Europe has a sustainable supply of affordable medicines and that the European industry remains an innovator and world leader. But the strategy will also work towards making the legislation future-proof in the digital age. To maximize the potential, we must address long-standing challenges, including data transparency, quality, interoperability, and the need to safeguard privacy. It is often said that the health sector is a data-rich but information-poor. We need to make it easier to access data and to bring legal certainty across the member states, how data can be used or shared. The best way to do so is to link health data at EU level with common rules, and the European health data space will do just that. We need to ensure that sensitive health data is used responsibly, and that means addressing these issues properly and holistically. Our starting point must be the full respect of European values. The trust of the citizens is an indispensable requirement for our success. We have to ensure the pooling of health data is secure and that patients maintain control of their data. This will also make it easier for people to fully exercise their data portability rights. These principles will underpin the legislative proposal for the European health data space. Data protection will be and is non-negotiable in this endeavour. Later this year, we will also launch a pilot project to test the interoperable infrastructure for secondary use of health data. Coordination here is important. So the European Medicines Agency and the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control and other agencies will be part of this project. This should support the creation by 2025 of a European health data space infrastructure to support access to data for research, regulatory activities and policy making. By 2025, My goal is that all citizens are able to share their health data with healthcare providers of their choice when traveling abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, stakeholder engagement is crucial. We need your insight and your expertise. We have recently launched the public consultation on the European health data space. I urge all of you to make your voice heard. You have all been active in advancing cooperation in the area of digital health in the eHealth stakeholder group, and I want to genuinely thank you for that. Now I wish you a productive and insightful discussion, and I very much look forward to working with you to unlock the power of health data. Thank you.
So Commissioner Kyriakides there underlining the importance of data and the role that the European health data space can play, but also some of those long-standing challenges, as she put it, that I hope to discuss with our second panel this afternoon. And in answer to the person who asks, where will the recorded version of this presentation be available? As I said, the whole event, including that, will be put on the EFPIA YouTube channel after this event. So, as I said, we're going to have two panels, the first focusing on the value of data and then on some of the barriers that need to be addressed. But to set the context for our discussions, I'm delighted to give the floor to Ioana Maria Gligo, who is Head of Unit for European Reference Networks and Digital Health in the Directorate General for Health and Food Safety in the European Commission. And Ioana will be joining our panel after that, so if you have any questions, you can put them to her then. Ioana, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at this event. I think most of the issues that have, the strategic issues have already been expressed by the Commissioner, but I will try to give a little bit more details about and to explain a little bit more the context and the next steps. So in terms of the European health data space, we are basically building upon the Data Governance Act and the work that the Commission is carrying out on data spaces in general. And European health data space will be one of the data spaces that will be set up in Europe. And in order to do so, we are working on several areas on the legal aspects, with the legal proposal to be put forward at the beginning of the next year. Infrastructure, both for the use of data for healthcare and policy making. Data quality, making data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and capacity building, supporting, including the digitalization of the health sector, support for training, etc. And all these on trying to support the use of data for healthcare, so the so-called primary use of health data, as we call it in also in the GDPR terms, and also the reuse of this data for research and policy making, the secondary use of health data. Here you have a little bit of an overview of the problems related to the use of data for healthcare and for research and policy making, with quite a lot of fragmentation, with limited access and control of patients to their data, problems related to the interoperability, limited provision of telehealth services and mHealth services, uneven legislative framework, and a lot of divergency and fragmentation among them, both for the primary and the secondary use of health data. There are also aspects related to the provision of the AI and the limitations in this area. We are not building from the scratch. We are building upon the framework set up by the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive, by the GDPR, by the Data Governance Act, and by the artificial intelligence. So in some cases, the European health data space will be a lex specialis. In other cases, like for instance, for the cross-border directive, we'll take out the elements, the current digital aspects, and we'll take them forward in a fully fledged legislative proposal. Now, when it comes to the use of data for healthcare, I don't want to repeat again the main challenges, but they are related to the access and interoperability of data, the possibility of people also to take the data between different healthcare providers, and also the fragmentation of the tools and infrastructures. And what we are trying to support, and it's already being done at EU level, it's the sharing of health data between countries. So a patient traveling from one country to another can share his patient summary, which comprises the main information about the patient's allergies, the medication, vaccination, etc. But also e-prescription with a pharmacist or with a healthcare professional in the country where he or she travels. And what is the most important, it is in the language of the healthcare professional. And we are aiming at taking this further, enlarging this type of exchanges to with images, lab results, discharge letters, and also offering access to patients to their health data. Also building upon what has been done on the digital COVID certificates. For the time being, we have 7 member states which are exchanging patient summary and e-prescriptions, and this year we hope to have 15 member states. Basically, what we are seeing is also that the neighbors are exchanging more of the information. The most of the exchanges so far are between Finland and Estonia in terms of e-prescriptions, around 20,000 e-prescription dispensed despite COVID. Now, in terms of interoperability, the Commission has put forward the electronic health record exchange format with the standard specifications. And we are aiming at taking this forward in the context of the future actions. On the digital health services, again, what we are seeing is quite a lot of fragmentation. The directive, the Patient Rights Directive, allows for the reimbursement also of telemedicine. And this is important that this type of services can be provided cross-border in a more systematic manner and can support basically the provision of the healthcare cross-border. I was often providing the example, for instance, of some border regions where, for instance, a patient is taken from one country for, I don't know, let's say a stroke in another country, and then the doctor in the country where he or she had the treatment wants to monitor, and this can be done relatively easy through telemonitoring. But of course, this also requires elements related to the interoperability, related to the reimbursement, etc. On the secondary use of health data, research and policy making, here we are building on the Data Governance Act, and we are aiming at support the reuse of data by researchers, policymakers, and industry with a trusted governance. We are looking with a lot of interest to what is happening in several countries which have built such a trusted governance, like France, French Data Hub, Finland, FinData, the German Research Data Center, etc., which also support basically the access to the data and the protection of personal data, and also very strong safeguards which are being put in place. Here we are also looking at the possible pilot project that was also mentioned by the Commissioner on an infrastructure, trying also to support the Darwin project that is being developed by the European Medicine Agency, and also the work of ECDC, but not only. This is just basically to test, and then we will see how this can be taken forward. All this, as I said at the beginning, cannot be done without investments. And there are important sources of investments under the multi-annual financial framework, be it with the national funds, but also now in this MFF with the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is a new funding source compared with the previous one, European Regional Development Fund, InvestEU, European Social Fund, etc. And also with other types of investment funding like EU for Health, which this time will have quite a consistent envelope for digitalization, Digital Europe program, and Horizon Europe for research.
Very briefly now, if you would, Joanna. Sorry.
So basically, again, I would like to reiterate the call of the Commissioner for participating in the public consultation. Here you have a kind of a timeline, but probably the main call is for you to participate in the public consultation that will be under the better regulation, one of the main input sources for the legislative proposal at the beginning of next year. And I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I remain at your disposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And I have already had a question from the audience saying, would you be willing to share the slides following the seminar? Would that be all right? Are you okay with that if our organizers do that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. So an answer to Carolyn Healy there. Lots of other questions already coming in, but we'll come back to them in this and the next panel. Let me introduce our other two panelists in this session to join us. Deepak Kalra, President of the European Institute for Innovation Through Health Data, IHD, and Birgit Bauer, a patient advocate and person living with MS. Very warm welcome to both of you. Joanna, you have disappeared from my screen. Can you reactivate your camera? I think it's because of your slides. There, no, do we have? Yes, we do. Excellent, marvelous. So a very warm welcome. And we've heard from the Commissioner and from Joanna already, Deepak, about the importance of this issue. Why do you believe in the area of health, because generally speaking, this is a priority for the Commission right across the board, a European data space. Why is this so important in health? And how much impact could this initiative have?
Well, thank you very much for asking me. And absolutely, this is a critical moment for Europe. It's an exciting moment for Europe. And I'm really passionate that we must embrace it. We are, as a society, getting older. We've known that, of course, for a long time. But as we collect more and more diseases as we age, we accumulate diseases and we start to enter a space where the knowledge we presently have isn't enough to really understand how diseases interact. It's a time of treatment innovation. And as we get multiple treatments, again, how do they interact with the multiple diseases? We don't really know. There's a real opportunity now for us to shift the center of care more closely to patients with devices, with apps, with wearables and communications, all sorts of magical things that some of our colleagues in the audience are inventing. But again, how best to leverage those and how to ensure that this whole package leads to the best outcomes for finer and finer grained subpopulations of people for whom care has to be personalized. I've just described to you the knowledge ecosystem where we are still too far behind where we need to get to. We cannot do that with small data sets. We cannot do that just with clinical trials. We need massive scale data so we have enough patients with each nuance to learn from. That's why Europe has to come together. We have to collaborate and benefit from our scale. I guess that's my headline message to you.
Absolutely, and come into some of the principles that need to underpin. And I know you've done a lot of work in relation to acceptance by patients of the use and sharing of their data and so on. Love to come back on that a little bit later. But Birgit, from a patient perspective, and Deepak, they're talking about shifting care more closely to patients. And we heard the Commissioner underlining her dream for 2025 and that cross-border element to it as well. From your perspective, how important is this issue if in future we are to deliver genuinely more patient-centered care?
Yeah, so what should I add? Deepak said it almost all. But yeah, we are talking about patient-centered care, but we don't have it. We also talk about personalized healthcare, and this is what we can reach with more data because we have to know the diseases. As a person living with MS, I know exactly how it is to miss more data about the disease because we don't have a cure for MS at the moment. We would love to have it, but we can't at the moment. So we have also to use that data to do more research and development, also to bring people together and find out more about the diseases. And one example is also MS and COVID. How does it relate together and how can we solve their problems and the side effects we have now, what we see? But we don't have that data. And this is a critical moment, as Deepak said already, and we have to come together also to have more effective healthcare systems, also to do more prevention. And as we always say, health is wealth. So it's important to use that data also for the public, for the citizens, to find out more about diseases, to identify patients much earlier and help them faster and more effective. And I think this is very important.
But do you think, Birgit, just to follow up on that, that patients, you obviously as a patient advocate, you know how important this is, and you want to share your data because you want that cure, you want those answers. Do you believe that is the case? And same question to all of you, but I'd like to start with you. For when patients are reluctant, is it a lack of awareness? Is it a lack of understanding? Or is it that we haven't built that trustworthy framework where they feel comfortable? What for you is the key to getting patients, more patients, to be willing to share their data and feeling that they can trust the system? Same question to all three of you.
I think in the first case, it's more information and education. Patients are not informed and citizens are also not informed. So when I'm talking to my community saying, oh, we will have a European health data space, they say, what? So we need more education, we need more information. And with that, we can build trust for the in the citizenship that they can donate or spend their data in a safe and in a secure way, and we have to explain them how it will work and how it will be done. And as soon as we do this, and as soon as we start with education in a good, not fragmented communication strategy, in a common European communication strategy, then we will start to generate more trust and we will convince the people. I'm convinced about that too.
Thank you. Deepak, from your perspective, and I say you ran some multi-stakeholder dialogues, I think with the Digital Health Society, where you looked into what makes patients accept the use of their sharing and use of their data. And one, in fact, just to bring in, so what did you discover? But also Carl Johnson asked, with the focus on patient-centered care, can you address how a health literacy strategy aligns with health data technology innovation? I know that literacy, data literacy, was something you very much emphasized after those in your recommendations. Deepak.
Yes, okay, I'd like to tackle your question in two parts. So one part strongly builds on what Birgit has said, that we need the public to be on board. And I don't mean reluctantly agreeing, giving us permission, feeling, okay, it's all right, then I'll trust you. I mean the word enthusiasm. We need patients to be saying, to the kind of messages we've already articulated in this panel, that there are so many things we want the data to be used for. We really want it to happen. Please use the data. Please put it to good use at scale. Give us the innovations we need so we get cures for diseases, we get new treatments, etc. So we need the public to be fully on board, and that has a strong educational component. And I think Birgit's put it very well. And absolutely, from our roundtables, multi-stakeholder ones, and also sessions that we ran separately, specifically with patients and citizen groups, people want to be more gripping their own data. They don't just want others to understand their data, they want to understand their data and make good use of it. But there is a second half, the other side of the coin. The risk with saying it's all about education and literacy is an arrogant risk that says, we've got the formula right, we just need to educate the public. I'm actually not sure that's very honest. There are many aspects of what is good practice with data that we know. Yes, we have regulation and other instruments, but how we operationalize that, what purposes are society comfortable with? How do they want data to be safeguarded, whether anonymized or not? I think there is still work to be done to help us to define the ground rules that will assure us of public enthusiasm. And as a final sentence, if I may, the European health data space is not only an existential thing, it's a gravitation point to bring European stakeholders together to define those common ground rules. And we learn that from our multi-stakeholder roundtables.
Thank you. And Joanna, you outlined some of those key issues, as did the Commissioner, that you will be addressing the questions relating to the legal aspects, quality, infrastructure, and so on, that governance framework for the whole thing. But do you share Deepak's? Because that of itself, yes, that will answer many of the questions, but there needs to be this public debate about data, the role of data, its place as a societal good, if you like, beyond direct benefit to me as an individual patient. How do you see what you're doing and the work to prepare the health data space in this broader context of a public debate? Do we need more of that? And policymakers, can you help?
Yes, I think we definitely need more of that. And this is why I was asking basically for the participation in the public consultation. We also were quite happy to see that we had quite a high interest, for instance, in the inception impact assessment. We have around 150 contributions from different stakeholders. We are also regularly having discussion in the eHealth stakeholder group, and I'm very happy to have very thorough and well thought positions, and I would like to commend again the contributions, for instance, of the Patient Forum, European Patient Forum, of EFPIA, of MedTech. I don't want to make any discrimination by quoting only some of them, but I know that they are present in this debate, and they bring very, very consistent and useful contributions. I mean, just to say maybe one thing, and this is also clearly shows how important the debate is. We are also in my unit working on the rare diseases, and indeed the interest, for instance, of the patients with rare diseases to share their data is the trust in the sharing of the data is probably more informed than for other patients. And what we are we are now supporting, for instance, the year ends with the setting up of the registries, and we hope that this will be an important part of the European health data space, and that will also contribute to making a difference for the treatment and diagnostic and treatment of the rare disease patients. And there are also for instance, we are seeing the emergence of data altruism and other forms of support. But what is very important is basically to build the trust in the system. And for instance, just to give the example of countries like Finland, France, etc., they have had a very thorough debate nationally before going towards option of governance. And I think this is what we are also needing both at the national and the European level. Very thorough debate in which the stakeholders can contribute and can actively participate.
Absolutely. And one of the key questions everyone is asking, and Dennis Burkhalter asks it here in relation to industry, is who will have access to this data? You talked about its reuse by researchers, by policymakers, and by industry with a trusted governance. And that, of course, one of the central pillars of the proposal that you're developing. In terms of those who have concerns about how much access industry could have, Joanna, can you just address that issue head on? And then there's a couple of other specifics I'll put to you, and then I'll come back in a broader discussion.
Yes, I mean, this is a little bit, I don't want to say what will be in the legal proposal, because we are in the stage of the public consultation of the better regulation, so we simply do not know. This is why we are carrying out all this process, which is very thorough, to really try to look very deeply into these aspects. And this is why we have been also started, for instance, in the eHealth stakeholder group, a consultation process with one of the questions, exactly this one: how can we build a public-private partnership for supporting the access to data? And it's not only B2G, not only the business getting access to the data held by the government, but also the other way around, the government getting access to the data held by the business, and also the businesses getting access to the data held by other businesses. Just think about how much money could be basically spared by reusing the information, for instance, from the clinical trials. With the new clinical trials regulation, there is much more transparency on this, but probably there are still areas where there is a lot to be done from this mutual sharing of the data between different parts of the society. And again, it's not only business to government, business having access to the data of the government, or but it's much more multilateral, let's say.
Thank you. Let me read out a comment from Marin Coburn, who says, we are in full agreement that the health data space is critical to advance healthcare and understanding of disease and its progression. But in order to support the appropriate development of treatments, it should be shared between all stakeholders, including patients, HCPs, regulators, medicines developers, and other stakeholders. Just one other to you, if I might, before we go on, because there are several questions about the international element of all of this. So let me try and put them all together in the interest of time. Stephen Burke says, how can we allow the movement of data on a global scale and maintain trust once it moves outside, for example, into a non-GDPR compliant area? Others asking, let me just scroll up. Yeah, linking to databases outside Europe will dramatically increase the population we can survey for data. Lots of, do you have plans in the health data space to develop links across EU borders, asks oncologist Paul Corners. And though it's a need, says Nige Huge, why the focus on cross-border data flow, which would be a minority of patients within a member state? So lots of questions about how do you interact with jurisdictions outside the EU, international. I know you want to come in, Birgit, but a quick, just in terms of the approach to the international element, Joanna, and then I'll come to Birgit and to Deepak for a comment, because there's so many questions on this issue.
Okay, I think there were two types of questions. One is related to secondary use of health data international, and the other one primary use of data and within the EU. Okay, so secondary use of data and international, I think basically the rules are quite clear in the GDPR, and whatever we will do in the European health data space will have to take into account the Chapter 5 of the GDPR. So I think that's a very important starting point. Again, I don't want to prejudge what has been the legislation because it's premature. On the cross-border data flow, the treaties are as they are, and basically the union has more competence in the single market and also supporting the free movement of patients, of services, of goods, mostly patients, and of people, including patients and services. And this is basically one of the main area of intervention. It is true that, for instance, the interoperability could also support the provision of those and the building up of the single market. However, I think we also need to be mindful of the competencies of the member states in organization of the healthcare system.
Absolutely, thank you. Birgit, you wanted to come in and a comment to this access issue as well, if you would, that I raised and our audience raised with Joanna earlier about who will have access and how. A comment from both you and Deepak on that in terms of the principles we need to apply here and what you think will deliver what you hope for from this data space. Birgit first, then Deepak.
Okay, I want to add something. So these patients as stakeholders, when I give my data, I want to have something back. I want to have access to this data because I'm one of those patients who wants to be informed and I want to read that. And I think we need also portals or also, I don't know, websites, whatever, to give people access to that data collections and also to their own research. And regarding the rules, how to use it, I think we must adapt or we must create some different frameworks for the different stakeholders because no one fits for all. I think we need some frameworks for the industry. We need also another framework, maybe more for research and development. And we have to make clear that everyone has a chance to use that data, but they also should have some limits, but also involve their patients because Joanna, you mentioned the rare disease patients. They want to use that data. I know them very well. I'm working with them. So they want to have the data. And also the people like me, I'm living with MS. There is no cure. As I said, I want to have that data too, because I want to know more. And I think I'm not a lonely patient in the prairie outside. There are many other patients who think in the same way, and we should respect this. And when we give that data, we want to have something back. That's the deal.
Deepak.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to make a quick remark about the patients and then move on to the industry topic, if I may. I think the cross-border has been done really well by the other two. When it comes to patients, reinforcing what Birgit just said, when we ran some group discussions with patients and citizens, one thing that was very clear is, yes, they want their own data. They'd love to be able to cross-reference their own data with anonymous data on patients like them, so they can see how they're doing in relation to a peer group. And there's nothing in the GDPR that would make that difficult to achieve. If it's anonymized well enough, you can profile an anonymized data set and give that to them. And I think that allows people to feel not so lonely, exactly as Birgit was saying. But I'd like to turn to the industry, if I may, as well, because I'm conscious that we have a very large EFPIA and MedTech Europe family in the audience today. And I'd just like to reflect a combination of roundtable inputs from a number of industry players that we've held in the last 12 months about the EHDS. But if I may, I'll bundle that in with 10 years of my own experience working in projects with a number of industry players. The spirit that I have encountered almost 100% across the pharma and the medtech and the tech industries has been about collaboration. It's not been about possessiveness with data. It's treating data as a pre-competitive good. People I've come across are willing to contribute their data. Joanna mentioned clinical trials data. There's a real wish to contribute data into a public good space so it can be reused, and to share data in ways that are philanthropic. They will exploit it each their own, of course, to develop products and services, but that's what they use the data for. When it comes to, if you like, possessing or having a handle on the data, there's a really very generous spirit amongst all the industry players I've met. And I think that Joanna will find, I'm sure you've already picked that up as well, that the European health data space has a real opportunity to join forces with industry, as well as with the public bodies that you and Stella mentioned earlier, as you said, non-exclusively, EMA and ECDC, etc. Huge opportunity. Let's bring industry with us in this.
Thank you. There's lots of questions, ladies and gentlemen, I should say, about GDPR. I'm going to leave those to our second session when we're more going to focus on the barriers issue. But when it comes, Joanna, to the fundamental principles, as we look at these challenging issues around governance and so on, the issues that you've highlighted, that point Deepak is making about data as a pre-competitive good and as a societal good. So we view it in a different way because there was a question from somebody about, the business models of companies where data is a commodity and data has a value for a business. But in terms of how we approach this issue, do you think looking at that way of looking at it that Deepak's talking about as a pre-competitive, as a societal good, gives us an answer to the governance question and the access question?
Well, I think the GDPR is pretty clear, doesn't necessarily speaks about ownership, but basically the data subject has a fundamental role. And I think there are pretty clear legal basis in terms of accessing and processing the data. So basically I don't want to enter into a debate about ownership of the data, because I don't think this is the right approach. I think what is very important is that the European health data space governance framework and the rules will clearly build upon the GDPR and the possibilities offered there, including the European law for processing the data for different purposes, including other types of, including consent, etc. And again, we are also aiming at building upon the Data Governance Act, which sets up the framework, the general framework for access to data cross sectors, actually. Yeah, basically, this is. I think this is again. I think it's a little bit too early to say too much about the legal proposal, because there is still a long way to go with a very heavy better regulation process. And
but as you pointed out also, and the Commissioner pointed out, and just wanted to ask a question about that, but Deepak, I'll bring you in a moment, about stakeholder engagement, because the Commissioner underlined that it's so central to getting the right answers to these questions, and how you intend to take that forward, Joanna. But Deepak, you wanted to come in here.
Yes, I think Joanna's made excellent points, but I'd like to add a complementary one, if I may, which is that the GDPR does refer and govern personal data. But when we're looking at research use of data, there is a huge opportunity, A, to anonymize data sets. It's always difficult to anonymize very detailed fine-grained data, but subsets often can be. But the other one is there are, within Europe for sure, huge pioneering efforts. In fact, somebody in the audience who put a question earlier is heading up the IMI Eden project, distributed querying and better encrypted querying methods, meaning that we don't always have to struggle with the personal data issue. So what I'm saying is let's keep that subject very open-minded for the different possibilities that are there technically as well.
Absolutely. And before we draw some conclusions from this panel, just one thing to read out, and then I come to Birgit. Angela Bradshaw says she fully agrees with your point, Birgit, about patients being able to access their data, or the very least their patient summaries. An additional need would be for patients to understand how and where their health data travels between organizations and healthcare providers, for example, via data tracking. This would be a great step forward, she says, in helping us to understand how our individual data might be contributing to a societal good. And Carl Johnson asks you, what does getting something back look like? He says, is it monetary, informational, motivational? A point to that, and then we'll draw some conclusions and move to our second panel. Birgit.
I agree totally with Angela and hello. And to Carl, yeah, something back looks like an information. It is more expertise for myself, because I'm an engaged patient, and as patients we have to know more about all the diseases we have, and we also have to know how maybe research and development works. And this is also interesting for a lot of other peoples, because we want to know how the clinical trials look like, or what the outcome of that is. And this is something back. And this is how it could looks like. So it's not monetary, it's knowledge, it's information, and it's learning about my disease to have at the end also for myself a better disease management. And that's what we are looking for, because data can help also to grow our quality of life. And this is important. And I think this is a right, not a gift.
Thank you very much, Birgit. Okay, we are almost out of time. I'm sorry. These days, it's like speed dating webinars these days. But Deepak, from your perspective, same question to you all. We've discussed a lot of issues, and we've discussed the importance of getting this right. For each of you, and Deepak first, of all the issues we've discussed, for you, what is the most important priority if we are to genuinely unlock that power of health data that the Commissioner spoke about and you've all spoken about, and deliver the innovation that will really meet patients' needs, those unmet needs that Joanna, the rare diseases and so on? What for you is the most important priority for action? Same question to you all, 1 minute each if you would.
Okay, well, there are thousands, of course, but if I had to pick only one, and you've been very strict, I would say we need to work further on good ground rules regarding data access, decision-making, what's allowed to whom, for what purpose, with what transparency and accountability, and payback to society from data use. That's the place that's probably least cohesive at the moment. It's relatively mature, but it's patchy. That's a place that will allow us, if we get those things right, to turn public acceptance into public enthusiasm, which was my starting message.
Absolutely, you brought it neatly round. Joanna, for you, I know obviously you're working on all of these issues and a lot of work to be done, but from a personal perspective, what for you is the most important to focus on, if you can say so?
Well, Deepak said the first thing that I would have said, so it already gives me the advantage of having something else to mention, and I would probably mention interoperability.
Yeah, an issue we'll come back to, I hope, in our second panel as well. And Birgit, I came to you last because I wanted to give the patient, for whom all this is for, the last word. Your key priority, if you are to get what you want, you talked about very much what you want, but to make this really work in practice, what's the most important priority for you?
Patient involvement, to say it very clear. Patient and citizen involvement. We need that voice, and we have to have the sit on the table. And because as I always say, patients know best what the needs are. And this is also a point for data.
And are you happy when you make that a priority, suggest you don't think you have enough of a seat at the table, that your voice is heard enough at the moment?
No, not at the moment. We could have more voice. And as I have just one priority, I agree with Deepak, I agree with Joanna, they said it all, so I can add the
Perfect. And on that note, thank you so much to all three of you. And thank you, Joanna, for your presentation as well. Great discussion. I wish we had several hours. I'm sure we'll come back to this many times. And ladies and gentlemen, just to say, you had a lot of questions about GDPR, quality of data. We're talking about interoperability. We're going to tackle those in more detail to the extent time allows in our second panel. But panel, thank you very much indeed. So we are, as I say, now going to move to our second panel. And what we want to focus here is some of those barriers, some of those difficult issues that need to be addressed. And we've already heard some answers for how they might be addressed. But let me introduce our second panel to discuss that. Chris Walker, Vice President Regulatory Affairs at Amgen and Chair of the EFPIA Digital Health Working Group. Welcome to you, Chris. Angel Martin, Director GAMP Medical Technologies EMEA at Johnson & Johnson and Chair of the MedTech Digital Health Committee, Digital Europe Health Committee, and Cynthia O'Donoghue, Partner and Deputy Practice Leader of the IP Tech and Data Group at Reed Smith in London. Very warm welcome to all of you. Now, before we get into the meat of all the issues that are being raised by our panel, all relating to those barriers, I just wanted to ask each of you, and Chris, let me start with you, in terms of the impact. And we heard about it from the Commissioner, we heard about it from the panel. Why for you as an industry is this initiative so important, and how much impact, if we get it right, could this health data space have? Same question to you all before we get into the detail.
Thank you, Jackie, and sorry we have such long titles that you had to introduce for us all. But no, I think fundamentally, I think we all agree with the Commissioner. The power of data and our ability to unlock it is so important to us. I think you've heard from each of the panelists so far and the Commissioner herself what that data can do for us. So if we're industry and we're developing new medicines and we're trying to meet the unmet needs of society and improve healthcare, which is a huge ambition, we can only do that with better data. That data is really powerful. It can help us treat diseases better, understand diseases better, develop better medicines, do better clinical trials, maybe target those medicines to the right patients. So I think you've heard all of those things said by the other people, but industry and some of the people that you have now in this second panel, and probably people on the asking the questions too, they're people who are busy developing medicines. We can only do that with better data. So that data is fundamental to our ability to drag better medicines through and meet those needs of society.
And Angel, would you echo that? And also, just to give us a sense from an industry perspective, what are the challenges that you face, that medtech companies face at the moment in accessing the data that you need? What does this initiative have to address?
I would surprise you if I didn't, right? So no, there is much agreement there. And also from the perspective of the medical technologies industry, you could even see actually how puzzled we are sometimes about, and even frustrated about, the inability to use the data for the greater good that we see. We are at the heart of the ecosystem, of the healthcare ecosystem, right? Whenever you touch a point in a healthcare ecosystem, you will see a medical technology. And many of these technologies are generating data, and they could potentially be more empowered by data. But today, the approach is disjointed. We really are siloed. Even data that is within our companies, we cannot reuse for advancing in research and innovation. And this fragmented approach is what basically, I would say, prevent us actually to advance what I would call also I would say, democratizing medical care. I think there is a possibility actually to make every doctor, every hospital as the best doctor, as the best hospital in the world, and reduce the variability of outcomes wherever you are. And that's what our industry is striving for. But data today is a challenge to be managed. I mean, it's an opportunity and it's a challenge today. As I said, it's very disjointed, mostly also Because I think to Joanna's point in the previous panel, it's not so much necessarily about changing the rules. It's about how do we apply those rules on the ground. And we see huge fragmentation and diversity of views on how to apply those rules on the ground. So that's one of the challenges we find today. We are working through that ecosystem.
Thank you very much. And Cynthia, a lot of our audience talking and raising issues in relation to the relationship between GDPR and the European Health Data Space and how it's going to work, raising quality issues, raising patient consent issues, lots of different issues. What for you are the most important challenges that we're going to have to get the right answer to if this health data space is going to achieve all that you all hope for from it?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is the fragmentation that's been mentioned. I mean, the GDPR should really be seen as a guardrail. So how data should be used and shared as opposed to a blocker. You know, I think there are some difficulties around implementing it. But even though the principle behind or an objective behind the GDPR was harmonization across the EU member states, we're not seeing that in practice. We're seeing different interpretation by different supervisory authorities. And ultimately, I think a key role of those authorities is essentially to provide guidance and not necessarily to be blockers. You know, I mean, the objective behind the GDPR is to use and share data between the EU member states. Research, for instance, is mentioned twice within the GDPR. So it is there, it's a mechanism that can be used. Going back to the point that was raised by the previous panel, I think education is key. And that education is at the clinic level, at the patient level, at the regulator level, unfortunately. So, yeah, we need more harmonization. You know, Joanna said it when she said that the GDPR should be treated as lex generalis and the health data space is lex specialis. So we need rules in the health data space legislation to help harmonize and stop that fragmentation.
And a comment from one of our audience, Roxana Albu, who says GDPR is very unclear on many matters in relation to applicability of health data and research with health data. It's very important to clarify those question marks before bringing complexity with the Data Governance Act and the health data space. So very much echoed by our audience. When we come to the challenges, and the Commission has said that the new legislation will be built on three main pillars: a strong system of data governance and rules, as we heard from Joanna, data quality, and we've had a number of questions about data quality from the audience, and that question of a strong infrastructure and interoperability. Can I start with data governance and data exchange rules? And there's an interesting question, perhaps this time, Cynthia, I could come to you first. And to you, I wanted to ask about the balance here, because Santha Ramakrishnan says, data privacy regulations seem to be at odds with the high interest in patient groups. How do we remedy this disconnect? We heard a very passionate plea from Birgit in the last panel. She wants that data, she wants to share it, she wants access to it, she wants it to deliver for her as a patient. How do you see getting that balance right? And then to Angel and to Chris, more about this access issue and how we get those rules right that you've talked about. How do we make sure that the rules for access are fit for purpose and will enable you to use data for the benefit of society and for the benefit of patients? But first, on this balance question, Cynthia, how do we get it right? Is there a disconnect, do you think?
I think there is a disconnect. I think that, and this is what I meant by a guardrail, the GDPR should be seen as a guardrail instead of an inhibitor. I mean, I think everyone acknowledges that personal data, the individuals are at the heart of that, and the GDPR is an individual-centric piece of legislation. So when it comes to data governance, a lot of the rules are already set out in the GDPR, including transparency, including the ability to share data. So it's about ensuring that people are informed about how their data is going to be used, whether that's through educational tools, you know, so we get that enthusiasm that Deepak talked about, or, you know, giving patients access to the research studies and the papers that are published as a result of, you know, them sharing their data, or even transparency where data is shared with industry, where a new invention has come out, or a new device or a new drug that facilitates the disease condition or helps patients to be far more involved with their condition and manage their condition in a better way. So I think it's about connecting those dots.
Thank you very much. And Angel, to you, in terms of how do we get this question of the access to data right? And we talked in the last session about data as a pre-competitive good and as a societal good. How do you see getting an answer to this question that satisfies the concerns of patients who do have some doubts, have some worries about industry access or so on, versus the need for this if you are to innovate that you explained in answer to my first question?
Yeah, I think Joanna also gave us a very nice pointer with what has happened, for example, in Finland. I think the way the model has been constructed there through engagement of the different parties about what was meant to be done with the data, and then how it should be done, and who should be there doing the surveillance about the access to the data, to the use of the data. I think all those elements have been built in trust. Now, what we hope, and I think Deepak, like what Deepak mentioned about the European health data space being a gravitating point, I would also say it should be also a lighthouse, which actually, by showing some models of access and sharing of data, it will inspire also access and reuse of data outside of the European health data space, because the European health data space is not going to be the single and the only point, but it's going to be, I would say, central to what we see in healthcare, because eventually what we're really talking about here is a cultural change, and we are trying to manage change, and that requires the engagement of people, empowerment of people, as Birgit mentioned before, but also having legal certainty and clarity in the rules and how industry, but also public researchers may need data. I mean, we have seen how difficult it's been right now to put researchers, both private and public, to work around COVID-19. And it's not because there was a lack of willingness, because there was a lack of public good. There was clearly in all senses, but the lack of, I would say, harmonized approaches across the European Union made it really, really hard and challenging. And those are the kind of things that we need to overcome together.
Thank you. And Chris, a comment to that. And also we had quite a lot of, and I read some of them out in the earlier session, questions and comments about not just the European sharing of data, but international sharing. And indeed, we have one question from a journalist from Context called Sophie Petitjean, who wanted to ask, she asked something very specific, which I don't think we can get into in the time we have, about the UK and the NHS. And there was a conversation going on about how to ensure that post-Brexit. But she says, what are the similarities, mistakes to avoid with the European health data space? So this question of the international and how important for you as industry is that? So access to what will be there and links with the outside, the international.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big topic, the access of data, and it's, as I've said already, it's fundamental that we get that piece right. It's the first building block that allows you to then build from and say, what am I going to then be able to do with the data? If I only have access to a very small data set, I can only make very small insights. So at the patient level, as a patient, as Birgit, I get my own data, I can get feedback on that, I can do better at how I manage my own disease. At the broader level, it's across a series of, and then a series of diseases, and then internationally. So the bigger the data sets, the bigger the insights we can get. So the more we can harmonize how this works across jurisdictions, the better that will be for us. Now, many of the industry pieces, they don't sit in very small geographies, a part of a country, a single disease. They're across multiple diseases, they're across multiple jurisdictions. So ultimately, as when we do studies and we're trying to investigate how to meet unmet needs, we have to do that in the broad context. We're working globally often. We want it to follow, and as Cynthia was saying, GDPR, we need to be consistent with GDPR. That's a fundamental principle. I wrote down the phrase that Commissioner Kyriakides used: data protection is non-negotiable. I think that's fundamental. We have to make sure that we're not interested in finding out specific things about an individual patient. So that anonymization is critical to how we work. And as Angel said, I think we'll only be trusted for how we're going to use the data by sharing information, giving that feedback as to how it's been used, and then showing the outcome of what you can achieve by having the access. So when I heard Birgit saying, what will I get out of this? I get something that helps me. I feel like I'm helping others, and I can see the broader good that it's creating. And that's where I think it will start to make sense to citizens as well as patients, because when I'm a citizen, I'm not sure whether I should share my data. When I have a disease, okay, now I'm thinking I need someone to help me with this disease. When I'm getting a little bit older, I'm thinking, I hope we can solve all the diseases. So it's kind of where you sit in the continuum of improving health. I hope that we all get to the place where we'd all like to help others.
Cynthia.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow on from something that Chris said, and it did come up in the first panel too, which was anonymization. And I think there needs to be a discussion about the difference between anonymization and pseudonymization, because you know, as technology evolves, whether or not data can truly be anonymized is I think a difficult discussion. I also think we have to remember a data set needs to have utility. And if it's anonymized, it may not have the utility that's needed. So again, we look at, by analogy, clinical trials. It's usually initials or some sort of random identifier, but there's quite a lot of data that comes along with that. You can't necessarily tie it back to an individual, but it is used for the greater good. You know, whether it's a device, whether it is a drug, it does help people manage a condition better. So I think, you know, the idea that because industry is a commercial entity means it's bad, we need to get away from that idea. That ultimately, you know, data sharing and using data by industry is also for the greater good. So it comes back to that, what Joanna mentioned when she said it's a public-private partnership. And we need to make sure that data is accessible, not only within the European Union, but internationally. The data sets need to be as big as possible to get as much as real world evidence and as much, you know, much richer resource results. That those accurate and richer resource results only benefit the whole of society and benefit the patients like Birgit.
And as you say, that question of anonymization also come up, and your point about it can't be truly anonymous to have value in some cases come up from our audience. Can I turn, Angel, please do react to that if you want to, but to the question of data quality and how we ensure the quality of the data, and you mentioned, Cynthia mentioned their real world evidence, that it's trustworthy. Marcus Ott says, how do you guarantee the quality of data that gets shared and guarantee that the data is interpretable and actionable at the receiving end and isn't just data? Because I was quite struck by something the commissioner said, where I think she said we are information rich, data rich, but information poor. So we have data, but not necessarily of the quality or in the form that it really tells us what we need to know. What for you is the key there?
I think we have mentioned several things also in the previous panel, but to me, there needs to be actions both, I would say, in the I would say upstream and downstream. I think we certainly need standards that will really strive for higher quality in data. And we need to make sure that those standards really applied across the board so we can reach also interoperability. But I also say also on the demand side, we need to start increasing the use and acceptability of real world evidence. Because if regulators, if researchers are starting to increasingly use real world evidence, that will necessarily drive also a demand for higher quality in the data as well. And that's extremely important. And I think the last point, which I would like to mention, it's been mentioned in many different contexts, but I think if we are all also, I would say, educated, and when I mean all, I mean industry, I mean regulators, I mean healthcare organizations, patients, healthcare professionals, around the importance of data, around the importance of having high quality data, this is really a life cycle, and I would say a partnership. And I think it needs really an increase in literacy and skills around data, around data sciences. I'm not saying everyone should be a data scientist, but I think certainly an appraisal around data science should be improved. Yeah,
absolutely. And I want to come back on the partnership question before we close. Chris.
I was just going to sort of elaborate on that. I think unless you achieve some good standards and some good governance, you don't build trust. You know, that's the way I'd maybe summarize what Angel just said. I think without those pieces, you miss some building blocks, and therefore that next step where I have to trust this thing that I'm going to conclude from the information, I find that very difficult to do because I'm uncertain of the basis of where I've started from. So I think what we have to make sure we understand is what would be appropriate governance, what would be appropriate standards. There's data being collected all the time across all the different member states in different diseases. If it's collected in lots of different ways, and I can't now bring it together to understand how it relates to each other. And really, all I'm trying to do here is explain for some people in the audience who may not understand what interoperability actually means. It's a word we use a lot and assume everyone understands it. So I'm really just breaking it down to say, for me, interoperability at its simplest is take lots of different things collected in different ways and make sure you can pull them together to make sure you can understand something bigger from it.
Absolutely. And Andrew Davis, on the question of standards, Andrew Davis asks, do we need more different legislation, or should we make more use of standards and guidelines that could be more agile? And the Commissioner talked about this future-proofing legislation. We need to be, in this fast-moving world. Do you think it's a question of more legislation, or maybe these other tools might be more appropriate to answer some of these questions, Chris?
I think we've got some of these tools already. We've got the principles of farification. Again, we could turn back to explain what farification is. I'm conscious we're using all sorts of terms that some people may not have in their everyday lexicon, but which is part of the digital literacy part. But if we use the FAIR principles, I think we've got the basis of how we should think about data and how it should be collected and how it should be utilized, and then how it can be reused. We should apply those principles across the registries we already have. We should then embed them and work out how to bring them into the rest of the EHDS debate.
Thank you. There is a question, and very persistent Gegana Koleva put it in twice because I think she felt I was ignoring it from earlier. And it relates to reimbursement and looking at barriers. She says, I believe Gegana is a lady's name, but I apologize if it isn't. Many digital health innovations such as digital therapeutics and digital diagnostic technologies are not taking place or not arriving in Europe because of an unclear path to reimbursement. If we assume that having more digital health innovation is ultimately good for patients and maybe in the long run be good for national healthcare budgets, how can the European health data space support more agile reimbursement processes? Can any of you help me with this issue? Who would like to come in? They're all looking. Chris, please. Thank you.
Maybe I'll make a brief remark, and really maybe it starts with everything we've been saying. It's about collaboration across the whole of the network. I forget which person said there's a knowledge ecosystem, but it is an ecosystem. So if you just think about specific stakeholders, and I think maybe Iwana mentioned the EMA and the European Disease Control Center, we're going to practice there and see how they think about secondary reuse of data. If I only get as far as there, okay, I'm missing that next step on, which is the bit that Birgit cares about, because I haven't got to the point where I'm thinking about access. So if those stakeholders don't agree with the standards I've thought about, the type of data I'm going to bring, what's going to actually lead me to give a trusting evidence source that leads to access, I've missed a piece of the jigsaw. So I think it's a question for me of just making sure you've included all the right stakeholders, maybe in the right appropriate forums, and we've brought together a forum.
Well, what is the appropriate forum? Angel, a thought from you first. How do we you talked about partnership. What makes that partnership really work?
I wanted, if you will allow me, just maybe to elaborate something, because even digital therapeutics is a very general term. And I think sometimes we need to distinguish what the kind of digital solutions are we talking about and where do they intervene in care. Because we can be talking about patient monitoring, we can be talking about patient self-management like in diabetes, we can be talking about digital surgery, we can be talking about so many things, and not all of them will need to have the same consideration. So I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all when it comes to access, funding and reimbursement. But we need a deep reflection, because I think something is true. All these different solutions are bringing us more insights, more learnings, and actually healthcare systems need to be reflective of that. And I think we'll be talking about something that we've been, as an industry, always advocating for, which is value-based healthcare, and how can we can move a bit more to outcomes-driven care, where we're really insightful about what's right for the right patient at the right time. And I think those are the kind of conversations that maybe also will inform funding and reimbursement. Now, on the partnership part, I think everyone has said many good things, and I have very little to add. The only thing I will add it's that it needs to be a continuous dialogue and it needs to be iterative. I don't think just by preparing towards the European health data space is going to be enough. I think there will be even more and more conversations that we need to happen after we have launched the European health data space, because we will be learning as we go through. It's a change management, as I mentioned before, and therefore we need a continued partnership where we actually explore all the different possibilities. And I think in that respect, I appreciate, I would say, the connections which are really happening right now, also between the eHealth stakeholder group, the eHealth network, the joint action for the European health data space, the public consultation. So things are starting to connect with each other, but we need more of this.
And Cynthia, I mean, that is absolutely true, isn't it? This won't end with, okay, here's the legislative proposal for the health data space, even if it answers some of the issues we're talking about, this ongoing permanent dialogue, because also the challenge will change as we go along and new technologies raise new questions. Cynthia, how do you see that collaboration really working, that dialogue really working effectively?
Yeah, I basically keep talking, right? Engel's point is correct. We're at a very virginal state for the digitization of healthcare. I mean, some products have been digitized for a long time, but others haven't. Now's the time for standards. Technology evolves. Those standards have the ability to evolve. So I'd like to think of it as building blocks. I mean, ultimately, if we have the standards right now, as technology evolves, we can add and supplement to those standards. I don't think legislation beyond the health data space is necessary. As Chris said, we have a lot of tools. So, and I think in terms of reimbursement, most law, as everyone knows, is reactionary. Reimbursement is one area where there's the potential to be ahead of the curve and to allow for reimbursement of digital products. And I think Europe is behind some of the other countries in that regard. And I think, there will be a clamoring from patients. I mean, let's face it, information travels globally. They can see other people around the world that have access to things that make their lives better and can, allows them to manage their conditions better. So I think there will be a clamoring from patient groups as well for this reimbursement. And so I do think that has to be part of the health data space, and obviously studies, real world evidence, behavioral changes, earlier detection and potentially prevention of diseases. We can see some studies that are already indicating that through the digitization of healthcare. So
absolutely. So Cynthia, by way of conclusion, same question to you all those multiple benefits, and we heard not only about the clamour for reimbursement, but the broader clamour from Birgit for this data to be used to deliver for her and her passionate belief in it. For each of you, of all the challenges and barriers we've discussed, if you had to identify, it's a very unfair question, but let me not say a top priority, but maybe a key next step to ensure that we answer these questions in the right way and get a health data space that really delivers on your vision for what it could do. What for each of you in 1 minute each is your key priority? And I'll go the reverse way round to the way I started. So I'll start with Cynthia on this last question.
I'm going to be very quick. There's two key things for me, and that is collaboration and harmonization.
Thank you very much indeed. Angel.
Oh, wow, that's difficult a bit. So I would say we need a societal compact, a place where actually all the stakeholders agree on the terms of the governance, and that should actually be also transferable across the European Union. I think it will be too bad if we just had a very limited impact from the European health data space. It needs to go beyond the European health data space.
Thank you very much, Chris.
I'm going to build on both of those and tie them together, I think, because I think it is about collaboration. If we're going to achieve something that's around harmonization, it's removing the differences that we see across member states, it's agreeing some standards, we're only going to do that if we do it together. So for me, it's gathering the right people together, maybe in a compact, maybe in a public-private platform where we can enable the dialogue. As we do that, we'll actually generate trust. And for me, if we've got one focus, it's gaining understanding and gaining trust. The two go hand in hand. If we can do that, we will enable a better future where we can unlock the power of data, and that power of data will lead to better health outcomes. And that's why we're all around the table. That's why we've had so many people want to dial in and hear about this conversation, because data can be powerful.
Absolutely. It is quite striking just how many people joined this. Thank you so much, panel, for a brilliant discussion. Again, I wish we had another hour, another 2 hours, but we've covered an enormous amount of ground in the time available. Thank you, audience, to you for all your questions. We had some over 40 questions. I managed to touch on in one way or another about 30 of them, not directly answer them all, but at least we touched on them. Some were a little too detailed. Apologies to those I didn't get to, but this is the start, as we've said, of a conversation that needs to be had permanently. So thank you very much to Chris, to Angel, to Cynthia. Thank you again to our first panel. Thank you to EFPIA and to Europe MedTech for hosting us today. And most of all, thank you to all of you for joining, for your questions and comments. And I wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you and goodbye.